Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh to Madam Hasmah and to our fellow friends. We are from Group 7 and we are going to present Islamic derivative, Islamic profit rate swap.
As for introduction, first we need to know what is derivatives. Derivatives is a contract whose value is derived from underlying assets or indexes. These underlying assets can include equities, bonds, commodities, currencies, interest rates, and market indexes. Derivatives are utilized for a number of objectives, including risk mitigation, speculation on future price changes, and revenue generation. However, Islamic derivatives are constructed in accordance with the tenets of Islamic finance, which forbid the charging or receipt of interest or riba and the use of speculative or uncertain contracts, which is gharar. Islamic finance restricts the use of conventional derivatives such as interest rate swaps and currency swaps because they are charged or receive interest. Alternative structures have been designed for some derivatives such as options and futures in order to conform with the principles of Islamic banking. The function of derivatives in financial sector is it acts as a tool for hedging against potential losses. Derivatives can be used to hedge against the risk of price fluctuations in an underlying asset such as a currency, commodity, or stock. Another function of derivatives in finance is speculation. Derivatives can be used to speculate on the future price movements of an underlying asset. And last is derivatives also play an important role in arbitrage. Arbitrage is the practice of taking advantage of price discrepancies in the different markets. There are four types of derivatives. First is forward contracts. One party to a forward contract promises to purchase an asset from the other party at a future date and price agreed upon by the parties to the contract. These contracts are designed to protect against potential losses due to fluctuations in the value of an underlying asset. Second is future contracts. A future contract is similar to a forward contract, but it is traded on a regulated exchange. Therefore, they are subject to standard contract terms and daily mark-to-market settlement. This means that the value of a future contract is re-evaluated and settled every day based on the current market price of the underlying asset. Third is option. An option is a financial contract that gives the holder the right, but not the obligation, to buy or sell an underlying asset at a specified price within a specified time period. There are two main types of options. First is call options, which give the holder the right to buy an asset, and second, put options, which give the holder the right to sell an asset. Last is swaps. A swap is an agreement between two parties in exchange one stream of cash flows for another. The most common types of swaps are interest rate swaps, and currency swaps.
At this part, I'm going to talk about the features of the instruments. As I share here, there are four features of Islamic derivative, which is first is traded in an exchange. A security with standardized financial contract that trades on trading platform is referred as an exchange traded derivative. Next, second feature is that all derivatives trade are based on predetermined future data. A future contract is a contract between two parties to purchase or sell a certain commodity asset or security or the defined price at a given future date. Furthermore, the third element is the employment of hedging tools. Hedging is the process by which locals take steps to minimize or completely remove their exposure to exchange rate fluctuations resulting from transaction in foreign currency. Lastly, features of the instrument are often leveraged. It means that modest changes in the underlying value can result in the significant variations in the derivative values.
I will explain regarding the Sharia principle used in the instrument with the opinion from the Muslim jurists. The first Sharia principle is arbun. Arbun is known as down payment or advance money. According to the Muslim jurists, contemporary jurists have come to a consensus on the admissibility of arbun in modern Islamic finance practice. Next, three jurists, which is Al-Hanbali, Muhammad bin Sirin, and Ibn Umar, approved the sale of arbun based on practice done by Umar al-Khattab. Beside that, three jurists, which is Al-Hanafiyah, Al-Malikiyah, and Abdullah ibn Abbas, view arbun sale is as invalid based on hadith narrated by Amr bin Shu'aib. The second Sharia principle is wa'ad. Wa'ad is an Islamic good that is typically seen as a loan pledge in the context of business transaction. There are several opinions from the Muslim jurists, such as, according to Ibn Alish, wa'ad can only bind the voluntary contract, whilst exchange contracts are exempt from wa'ad. Besides that, Sheikh Badur al-Mutawalli Abdul Basir said that every unilateral promise that neither permit unlawful thing nor prohibit lawful thing is binding juridically and religion. Lastly, Sheikh Abdul Aziz bin Baz said that promise to sell are permissible provided had the goods that have been pledged are owned by those who made the promise. The third principle is salam. Buy on salam transaction involve the lender purchasing an asset from the party seeking finance, paying the asset purchase price in advance, and deciding to take delivery of the asset at a later time. Salam is permissible based on hadith narrated by Ibn Abbas. Besides that, Maliki school say that permissibility of salam, but the postponement of the payment allowed only for 3 days. Next, Shafi'i school say that salam goods can be delivered immediately or at a later date. And lastly, Imam Abu Hanifah did not permit salam in goods which not measurable or weightable. The last principle of Sharia principle is murabahah. Murabahah, or also known as a cost plus finance, is a type of Islamic financing where the buyer and seller agree on the asset cost and marking. Regarding the agreement contract, for Muslim jurists, which is Hanafi, Shafi'i, Hanbali, and Maliki, state that the murabahah pact is ethically and religiously binding but not binding legally because it is a charitable deed, which is not obligatory like usury, and there are no distinction between the seller and the buyer in a murabahah transaction, according to all Muslim jurists, both traditional and modern.
Next, we move to the comparison with conventional instrument. First, in the contract of Bay al-Arbun, the amount of deposit will be added as part of purchase price. However, for the conventional derivative, the amount of the deposit will be financed by loans with interest. If the customer tends to break the contract, they will get the refund for the amount of deposit according to Arbun. Nevertheless, referring to the conventional derivative, there are no need for vendor to refund the amount of deposit. So, the customer will never get back the money. On the other hand, wa'ad can be described as promise that must be kept in accordance with Islamic principles. It has become an obligation to enter into commitment. Moreover, wa'ad does not lead to issue with usury or uncertainty, since they are not combining two contracts into a single agreement. Furthermore, based on conventional derivative, the promise might be thought as a guarantee that someone will or will not do anything. The contract also contains the element of riba and qarar, since it involves two contracts in a single transaction, such as bilateral or unilateral contracts. In addition, murabahah can be defined as a contract which the price of the actual commodity and markup will be revealed. In murabahah contract, the losses will be shared by both parties. Nevertheless, conventional derivative recognize this contract as an interest-based lending agreement. The amount of interest and profit made is not to be expressed in detail, while all the losses will be placed on the debtor's shoulder.
Next is the structure of the instrument. First, under an arbun contract, the buyer concludes a purchase and makes an advance of some price which is less than the purchase price to the seller. The contract stipulates that if the buyer decides to proceed with the transaction, he will pay the seller the purchase price minus the initial deposit. If the buyer decides not to proceed with the transaction, he forfeits the deposit in favor of the seller. Second, wa'ad is often used in Islamic financial instruments such as forex forwards and Islamic repurchase agreement, or also known as Islamic repo. Islamic banks make a commitment of a bilateral wa'ad and then enter into a repo arrangement as part of an Islamic repurchase agreement whereby Bank A sells a security or certificate to Bank B at an agreed price, and then Banks A and B engage into a second contract thereupon in which Bank A makes wa'ad to purchase back the security at a defined future date and agreed price, and Bank B makes wa'ad to sell back the security at the same price. Third, salam is a form of forward contract whereby the price of an asset is paid up front at the time of the contract for the asset to be delivered later. Consequently, when using salam in structuring today, scholars prescribe several strict conditions, which is first, the seller must undertake to supply a specific asset at a future date in exchange for full spot payment at the start of the contract. Second, before delivery of the asset, the risk lies with the seller, and upon delivery, the risks are transferred to the buyer. Third is the buyer can enter into a similar contract with a third party in a parallel salam. This parallel contract will be independent of the first salam contract. And the last structure is murabahah. There are 4 steps in murabahah contract. The first step is a bank purchases commodities from a third-party broker, which is broker 1, at a particular price. Then, the bank sells these commodities to the counterparty at a price that includes the bank's cost price and some profit or markup, which the bank discloses to the counterparty. Typically, the cost price is payable by the counterparty in installments, but it can also be paid as a one-time bullet payment on a specified date in the future. Last, having purchased the commodities from Bank B, the counterparty sells this another third-party broker, which is broker 2, at a particular price.
So, I will be presenting the case study of Islamic profit rate swap. The definitions of Islamic profit rate swap is a financial instrument that allows two parties to exchange cash flows based on the predetermined interest rate or profit rate in a way that is compliant with Islamic principle. Islamic financial instruments such as Islamic profit rate swaps must be structured in a way that does not involve the payment of interest. In an Islamic profit rate swap, the cash flows are based on a profit rate that is agreed upon by the parties at the outset of the transaction. This profit rate is typically based on a benchmark rate where the cash flows are based on the difference between the actual rate and the benchmark rate and are determined using a profit and loss sharing mechanism. Furthermore, Islamic profit rate swap are also used to provide liquidity to the Islamic finance market and help to promote the growth and the development of the Islamic finance market. The structure of an Islamic profit rate swap is a financial instrument that is used in Islamic finance to manage interest rate risk. It is based on the concept of profit and loss sharing, which is a fundamental principle of Islamic finance. So, the structure of Islamic profit rate swap in Malaysia is typically based on a murabah transaction. It is an agreement by which the floating rate payer simply agrees to pay a variable amount. In a primary term murabah transaction, a bank purchases a commodity price and sells it to the customer at a markup price, with the profit margin being disclosed to the customer in order to convert the fixed rate to a floating rate. The bank agrees to pay the customer a fixed rate of a return on the investment, and in return the customer agrees to pay the bank a floating rate of return that is based on a benchmark interest rate such as the Kuala Lumpur Interbank Offer Rate. Next is Sequential Secondary Reverse Murabah Contract, SRMC. The first SRMC is entered into on day 1. For example, the date of entry into the primary term of murabah contract by the fixed rate payer utilizing an amount equal to the cost price element due to be paid to it by the floating rate payer on the next due deferred payment date under the term primary murabahah to purchase commodity from its commodity broker. And the fixed rate payer immediately sells this commodity to the floating rate payer for immediate delivery, and the floating rate payer immediately sells such commodities to the first broker to generate cash. Lastly, the features of the Islamic profit rate swap. Some of the key features of IPRS that include complying with Sharia law. IPRS are structured in a way that complies with the principle of Islamic finance, which prohibits the charging or paying of interest, which are riba. Moreover, the use of profit and loss sharing instead of paying or receiving a fixed or floating interest rate, Islamic profit rate swap involve the sharing of profits and losses between the parties that involved in the contract. This aligns with the principles of Islamic finance that encourage the sharing of risk rather than the transfer of risk. Islamic profit rate swap can be customized to meet the specific needs of the parties involved. For example, the profit and loss sharing mechanism can be tailored to suit the risk appetite of the parties, and this allows for greater flexibility in managing interest rate risk.
At this part, we will go through about the importance of Islamic profit rate swaps. First, IPRS is compliant with Sharia teachings. Therefore, it can be used by Islamic finance institutions and investors. Second, IPRS also can be used to manage interest rate risk in a way that is consistent with the principle of risk sharing and mutual benefit. Furthermore, the last importance of IPRS is that it can be used as a way for Islamic financial institutions to diversify their funding sources and manage their quality risk. Thus, with the growth of Islamic finance industry and the increasing number of countries looking to develop their Islamic finance sectors, it is likely that we will see the continued growth of the use of IPRS in the future.
In conclusion, the principle of Islamic finance which prohibit the use of speculative or uncertain contract and the charging or receiving of interest guide the construction of Islamic derivatives. Derivatives are important because it is for hedging against potential losses and the risk of price changes. Besides that, derivatives can determine the future value of an underlying asset. Derivatives was developed in many types such as forward contract, future contract, option, and swaps. Derivatives come with the advantages and disadvantages. In positive side, it increases flexibility, improves liquidity, and pricing efficiency. But in negative side, derivatives are complexity, high of potential for losses, existing of counterparty, and increasing the volatility. Next, the feature of the instrument are traded on exchange, or the transaction will take place in specific data and reduce risk by the hedging device. There are some of Sharia principles involved in the industry, which is arbun, wa'ad, salam, and murabahah. This principle got different opinion from the Muslim jurists. Next, compared to the conventional type of instrument, this Islamic derivatives is prohibited of riba, gara, and maisir. Next, a financial tool known as Islamic profit rate swap enables two parties to exchange cash flow based on a predetermined interest rate or profit rate in a way that is accordance with Islamic teaching. There are kind of structure existing in the Islamic profit rate swap such as murabaha, wakalah, and be conducted through securing process. Islamic profit rate swap is important because it is a tool in managing interest risk. Lastly, it is compliant to Sharia so that it can be used by the Islamic financial institution and the Muslim investors.